Greetings to all our viewers. As you very well know, starting a new business is hard enough, but starting one in a new country is another level of challenge. That's why today we've invited Stephanie Sang, the CEO of Granted Consulting, to share with us her expertise on how various of government grants in Canada can support your business. So Stephanie will give us some valuable insights on what a business grant actually is, what types of business can apply, and how. Let's get started. Hi, Stephanie. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks, Anna, for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for making the time. And first of all, let's let our audience know, how did you get into becoming a grant consultant?
Yeah, it's a very different journey for me because you don't learn about grants in school. So I had to have exposure to it through my work. And so I was born in Vancouver, in Canada, fourth generation Chinese entrepreneur. And all of my family members are entrepreneurs, like my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my parents. And what I found was, they really struggled as entrepreneurs throughout their time, working long hours. I'm sure this applies to a lot of the audience. And so as a child, I never really wanted to be an entrepreneur. But when it's in your blood, that's what happens. So I was in Taiwan for 10 years and working for a manufacturing company. And we were able to secure millions of dollars in grant funding and 0% interest loans from the government. And I thought, why didn't my family members access grant funding in Canada? Because I know that there are programs available. And so that's when I started the business, was thinking a little bit about filling that gap, not just for those that I know, but the hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs in Canada who don't know.
Right, right. So let's talk about grants specifically. What are they?
Yeah, grants are considered non-dilutive and non-repayable funding options. So what that means is it's funding that's provided by the Canadian government, usually to spur on economic benefit for the country. So think of things like employment, increasing opportunities to export. It might be upskilling Canadians so that they can have a better job and do more for the Canadian economy. And so non-dilutive means that you don't have to give away your company's shares in order to be able to apply for grant funding, nor do you have to repay it. So the non-repayable portion is, so long as you follow the rules of the grant as dictated on the agreements that you sign, you don't have to pay that money back.
Okay, that sounds great. And what source of funding? Where do grants come from?
So the grants that we work on at Granted are government funded programs. And I'm sure that there are other grants through foundations and, different charities and whatnot, but the ones that we focus on are for businesses. And so they stem from a couple of different sources. First of all, every year, the Canadian government will develop a budget, and that is announced in April. And then that covers a lot of the funding options on the federal level, so for the entire country. What then happens is the federal dollars can trickle down to the provincial levels or to the different territories. And then therefore, the territories will be able to, and provinces have their own programs that are really specific to meet the needs of environment and the regions that they're in. And so say, for example, in Alberta, you might have more oil and gas related grants, things to do with wheat farming, versus in BC, you may have things more to do with forestry and with fishing. So it just does depend a little bit on what each province's economic outcomes and what are the opportunities for growth.
Right. So that's, I think, important to consider which province you move it into in Canada and what's your what best aligns with your type of business, so you can get additional support through grants.
Right.
Okay. Let's talk about more the businesses. What types of businesses can apply for grants?
So it really doesn't have to do so much with the type of business. I would say that at Granted, we work with more than 20 plus industries. So it's not industry specific necessarily. Although I will say that certain industries, depending on the province that you're in, will be able to access more funding. So I think the thing to think about as an entrepreneur is the level of funding that you'd be able to get, as opposed to who could be able to get it. Generally, all businesses, so long as you're registered properly, can access grants. But whether or not you'd be able to access like a $20 million grant as a solopreneur, that's a different topic altogether. So programs that we've seen stronger in Canada recently have been things to do with clean technology or environmental sustainability. Those programs are really coming to the forefront because of initiatives from the government to be zero emissions by 2050. There's also programs for food manufacturing and for food security, because as we know, there were big issues during COVID of importing products. So encouraging more domestic growth, domestic farming is another opportunity for sure. And then, of course, we see technology as a big segment that is getting different types of grant funding, also because they are involved in research and development grants and innovation grants. So that can really boost Canada's reputation internationally when it comes to innovation.
Right. So do I understand this correctly? So it doesn't matter whether it's a big company or a startup, there are programs for both of them.
Yeah, that's right. It's the level of funding and the types of programs that you're probably that will differ depending on the size of business, maybe how many employees you have, maybe your revenue levels. Those are three things that we look at granted as well to determine what's, the right type of grants that would be a fit.
Right. So let's talk a bit more about the process itself. So what is involved in applying for grant?
First of all, I think that it's really important to know that registering your business properly is a key to be able to apply for grants successfully. So depending on your province, you might need a business license, you might need to register your business provincially or, through your territory. So it's really important to make sure that you have that done properly. And the reason is because when you go and apply for grant funding, often you will need these numbers or proof, including the certificates that you get through registration as a way to indicate that you are a properly registered business. So yes, it's important to obviously pay the fees associated with, the business licenses and the setup. Typically, they are one-time fees or paid once a year, but the opportunity is tens of thousands of dollars that you could then access, but you wouldn't be able to do it if you weren't registered properly.
When applying, is there some limitation in how the government would choose, for example, between me and other company if, let's say, we both registered properly?
Right. Yeah. So assuming that you meet that initial threshold and you are eligible for the grant, a few things that I would mention are things like making sure that your application is completed, actually complete. Another thing I find that often businesses get excited about because the dollar amount is attractive or it looks like, oh yeah, I could do this, is that the requirements on making sure that you are aligned with the program's objectives is really important. So while you could go and apply for $5 million as a clean tech business, whether or not what that stipulates and the direction of your business are aligned makes a huge difference. So you do want to make sure that you are looking at those program objectives, understanding what that commitment is, and making sure that it aligns with your business practices and where you want your business to grow. Another thing to look at is making sure that your claims and your reporting is complete. So it's amazing when you have that funding agreement that tells you that you got the grant with the government and they're going to give you X number of dollars. But what sometimes people forget is that there's the second part of the completion of the grant, which has to do with the financial reporting, with the progress reporting or final reporting. You might need to provide things like cash flow reports, or you might need to provide documentation to prove what it is that you did for a particular project that was funded under this program. If you're accessing things like payroll and wage subsidies, then you're going to have to choose what types of grants you access, because there are certain ones that you will need to provide documentation, such as pay stubs, timesheets, maybe even a paragraph or two from the candidate who you hired to say what did they learn on the job.
It's interesting. And tell me, please, how businesses get grants?
Well, we started out as a boutique consulting business. So we now have two arms of funding support that we provide to our clients. One side is if you are a business that's over 10 employees, you've got at least $1 million in revenues annually, and you've been in business for at least a couple of years, we will pair you with a dedicated grant consultant. And we call that service full service or boutique. And as a result of that, we'll manage, your grant strategy. We'll check in with you regularly and help you with the application as well as the claims process. What then happens, to everybody else, and I call those micro businesses. So they tend to be under 10 employees and, maybe under $1 million in revenues. They could be early stage or startup businesses as well. And so for that, we have our own technology that matches grants to businesses. So it's called Get Granted. And it's a self-service at this point in time, but we are looking at building another layer on top of that over the next 6 months. The self-service essentially gets rid of that first barrier, which is what are the grants that I can apply for? And what are the requirements to apply for the grant? So it gives you a simple summary of a couple of pages of bullet points. So it's very easy as an entrepreneur to understand what is involved in a particular program and do I qualify? And then, of course, the links to the application guidelines, which might be longer, might be, 15 pages, all the way up to 50 pages of reading, as well as the application forms are also available right there. So you don't have to go and hunt and search for those through your web browser. You'll be able to have it at your fingertips. And for that, it's a subscription fee that we charge annually, so that companies get this information throughout the year.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm sure that our audience received many valuable insights, and that will help them in their aspiration to move to Canada.
Now that you've heard this brief interview, make sure you go and get granted. Thanks, Anna, for your time.
Thank you. And that's it for today, folks. Stay tuned for more tips on how to run a successful business in Canada.